Oh, right. All right. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa wala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, everyone, and welcome to our weekly Wednesday discussion where we are going over the book Revolution by the Book by Imam Jamil Al-Ameen. And today we're going to be going over chapters 7 and 8. So we are actually almost done with the book. So chapters 7 and 8, um, we're going to spend most of our discussion on chapter 8 because there's really a lot to unload on there. And alhamdulillah, I think a lot of people seem pretty interested in chapter 8. But chapter 7, while not as heavy as chapter 8, is a chapter worth discussing. And so chapter 7 is titled Turn Right at the Light, where Imam Jamil Al-Ameen kind of discusses the contrast between Adam alayhi salam and Iblis, or Satan. And so he begins the chapter with giving us an overview of the story of Adam and Iblis by speaking about the verses of the Quran which go into detail on that story. And of course, many of us are very familiar with the story of Adam alayhi salam and Iblis, and so I'm not going to spend too much time going over that. But instead, we want to kind of focus on what Imam Jamil Al-Ameen is highlighting for us from this story, and and that is really the contrast between Iblis and Adam alayhi salam. So he mentions how both Iblis and Adam alayhi salam made a mistake. They did something that they shouldn't have done. Iblis is, of course, directly disobeying Allah's order to him and the angels to prostrate to Adam. And Adam's mistake was, of course, eating the fruit from the tree that Allah has forbidden for him and Hawa, or Eve, alayhi salam. And he talks about, of course, as we know, that when Iblis disobeyed Allah, instead of turning to Allah for and asking Him for forgiveness, instead he asked Allah to give him respite and to give him time to continue doing the evil that he was doing. And he speaks about how Iblis made his life goal at that point not only to stay astray, but to lead others astray as well. And then, of course, he discusses Adam alayhi salam and how when Adam made the mistake that he made, him and Eve, they made tawbah, repentance to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He turned back to Allah, asked him for his forgiveness. And we know that Allah definitely did indeed forgive him. And he highlights this contrast between the two and discusses how Adam, for the Muslims, is our prime example, the one of what we do when we make mistakes. Because we're all going to make mistakes. We're not going to be perfect. And he says that Iblis is the prime deceiver, the chief deceiver. He is the prime example of what we shouldn't be, and kind of serves as a prime example of the deceit of this world, as how Imam Jamil Al-Ameen puts it. And so he discusses about how um, we are told by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that, the shaitan is our major enemy, and that Allah warns us of the shaitan and not be deceived by shaitan, right? And, throughout the chapter, he just discusses about how, we see AIDS, herpes, and all these kinds of plagues that affect people because of their morals. Then we should say, Alhamdulillah, Allah has saved us from all this and put us at a distance from these things. But he says that although we say, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, that does not automatically mean that we are safe. And so he talks about how that shaitan can deceive even those who are Muslim. Even if you accept Allah as your Lord and Creator, you can still find yourself juggling. And he highlights that Muslims are not particularly or necessarily safe from Allah's wrath. and how the present reality can really be deceiving for people. And he again starts speaking about the importance of community, right? The importance of spirituality, the importance of tauba. And this is kind of like the brunt of the discussion for chapter 7 is just highlighting the contrast between Adam alayhi salam and Iblis, differences between them, how they approached making mistakes, how Adam alayhi salam is our prime example on what to do when we have our struggles, and how Iblis alayhi salam, as a reminder for us, is our chief enemy, and how it's so easy for us to lose sight of that reality, right? And so that's kind of really the main points I want to speak about chapter 7. Those of you who were able to read the chapter as well, when we go into the discussion portion, you're more than welcome to highlight other points in that chapter if you feel they are worth mentioning in this particular circle. So now I'll go ahead and jump into chapter 8, which is titled In Your Family. And so, as the title suggests, this chapter is dedicated to discussing the family dynamic, the role of the family, and how the role of the family has an overall effect on the community in general, right? So he begins the chapter by discussing, kind of giving us an overview of the overall intent of this book, which is to discuss the nature of having a successful struggle, right? This whole entire book is about how to have a successful struggle against an oppressive society through following the core principles of the religion, right? But he mentions that this chapter here is going to be mainly focused on um, having a harmonious relationship within the family, the importance of the family within the struggle. Because he says that you cannot have a successful struggle, you cannot have um, an upright, righteous community if you don't have an upright family. So he says to be able to function in a harmonious relationship in a social order or state, we must first be able to establish a stable family order. A revolution against the evils of social order has no legitimacy when those in revolt are oppressors in their own family order. So that statement there kind of really kind of sets the tone for this chapter, right? And so throughout the chapter, he kind of just talks about what exactly does an ideal family look like. Because he said that in order to have an ideal community, you need to have an ideal family. It has to start with the self and with the family, right? So he goes through the chapter kind of discussing what exactly does a successful family look like. So he starts by quoting the Quran, chapter 3, verses 34, 36, where he says that, where Allah says, men are the protectors and maintainers of women because Allah has given one more strength than the other, and because they support them from their means. Therefore, the righteous women are devoutly obedient and guard in the husband's absence that Allah would have them guard. So, now before I go into what Imam Jamil Imam Jamil's analysis of these verses, I kind of want to talk about some of my personal observations when it comes to this verse and verses like it. And really, you kind of find, in my opinion, two different types of fields of thought, right? Two different extremes. You have the one extreme where people say, the woman has to be completely obedient to the man. He has all rights over her. My rights, my rights as the husband. You have to listen to me. You have to do what I say. No talkbacks. This type of mentality, right? And then we have the other side, where basically it's all about, the woman's right, the woman's right, the woman's right. You have to take care of me. You have to buy me a car. You have to take care of my school debt. You have to take care of everything financially and just completely take care of me. And that's their main focus, right? So I've noticed in the community, you have kind of those two extremes. And Imam Jamil Al-Ameen kind of critiques both of those extremes in his own way. So he continues in his analysis of the verse. He says, These words establish an order, a process, a relationship based on the broader system of natural harmony created by Almighty God. Allah encompasses all of creation, therefore, all of creation interacts and cooperates in submission to the laws of the Creator. So he's basically saying here how these verses give us a skeleton of how what our roles are in our family. And it's only following the skeleton that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts for us and the examples of his prophet alayhi salatu wasalam gives us to really establish that successful thing. And so he kind of focuses on um, the word maintainer. He kind of talks about, well, first he talks about, he critiques the Western approach to families, how basically the secularized Western mind is always all over the place about these sort of things, since there's no true foundation in a secular mindset. He says how basically these family relations become more of like an experiment. Just see what works, what doesn't. All these types of different types of weird relationships come and develop, and it just really does not create a clear cut structure or order to things. And from there, he starts to speak about these particular verses that we talked about previously in detail. He starts thinking about maintenance, right, or halaqah, and he kind of talks about what that means, right. And he discusses how, yes, how the man does have in an Islamic family, the man is considered the imam or the leader of the family, but that comes with responsibilities, right? So he says how under the Sharia, under Islamic law, the the term maintainer, the husband is responsible for taking care of the basic necessities of the wife. And he kind of goes into that. He says how whether she's a rich woman and he's a poor man, she is absolutely entitled to having her needs, her necessities met, right? And he goes into what that means. Food, clothing, housing, toilet, necessities, medicine, doctors, surgeon fees, baths, everything that is absolutely necessary for that wife's survival, the husband is absolutely responsible for, right? And he, discusses, and he also tries to discuss of how when we speak about maintenance, it's not just about the physical needs, but also the spiritual needs as well. So he also kind of speaks about, I'm not really going in order of the chapter because there's really so much to talk about, but I'm just trying to focus on the way that's easiest for me to communicate to you guys. When he starts speaking more about maintenance, he talks about how it's not only the physical needs that the husband should be maintaining, but also the spiritual and emotional, right? And he speaks about that as the head of the household, the husband is responsible for setting an example. And by example, he means like basically leading by example. So he talks about like a variety of different things. He talks about that. He talks about one, the importance of communication. That the wife, while the man in a Muslim family may have like the last word, quote unquote, the wife has a right to be heard and to have her opinion valued and listened. He talks about that. He talks about how when it comes to the children, we always will know that it's important for us to make sure that our children pray. He quotes the hadith, also talks about that at age 7. The children should start to pray by age 10. If they're not praying, it needs to be kind of admonished. They have to be admonished for that. And he talks about how if you want your children to follow Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you have to set that example. If you want your wife to follow Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you have to lead by example. He talks about how if you're praying Fajr, how can you get upset at your wife for not praying if you're not praying? How can you get upset at your children for not praying if you're not praying? So he takes the whole authority aspect of that one side is really obsessed with I have the authority, I have this power, and he kind of does a reality check on it that this is not just an authority, this is a responsibility, right? And he talks about, again, the rights um, that the wife has over the husband in regards to their necessities being provided. And he talks about how if he also speaks about this particular verse. This is in chapter 24, verse 33, where Allah says, "Force not your maids of prostitution when they desire chastity, in order that ye may make a gain of this life. But if anyone compels them yet, after such compulsion, is Allah all forgiving and most merciful to them." So that particular verse, according to Imam Jamil Al-Ameen, he says that this verse is not exclusively talking about selling your body, right? But instead, he kind of talks about it in more pragmatic fashion. He basically says that this verse also means putting a woman or a wife in a position where she has to be the breadwinner. She has to take a job in order to help maintain the household. And and he says that while the wife, can work as long as both the husband and wife have an understanding and understanding that, of course, that he's okay with it and that it's her money. If she's in a position where she has to help out with the bills because you can't handle it yourself, you're not fully maintaining her, according to Imam Jamil Al-Ameen. And he says that since this is not full maintenance, you can't really. He basically says you can't really assume that you can't really basically call for your complete rights if you're not providing her complete rights. And of course, he talks about how what the term obedience means. That once the wife's rights are provided to her, that the husband doesn't need to have also rights to be respected, so that the wife is obedient to the husband, and all these things. And this particular chapter focuses mainly, I've noticed, kind of on the male perspective and kind of the role of the husband. I think it could be due to the fact that this particular chapter, maybe now wants to focus his talk towards the brothers. I don't know. But whenever we open the floor, I definitely want to hear from some of the sisters about their thoughts on this particular chapter. But he also starts speaking about the importance of working, the importance of getting actively involved in the community when it comes to employment, being employed. And he kind of makes a critique of some Muslims who just want to spend all their days in the masjid. That's all they want to do, just sit in the masjid and just make dhikr and pray. They don't want to leave the masjid. They want to do anything. He basically says how this is not the right mentality to have. Not only because of the rights that your family has over you, but on top of that, this goes against the sunnah. He talks about how the Prophet ﷺ was, as we know, a merchant. He was a businessman himself. And, that part of maintaining a society is investing in society. And what I've noticed is when he starts speaking about this, he actually makes a quote that he made in an earlier chapter. The saying or the phrase within the Jew community, which is it said concerning the Jew that the dollar changes hands 7 times in his community before it's turned over, before it leaves. It goes to the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, all the way around. Muslims must also use the labor that Allah has commanded upon us to begin to build the Jama'at, the community. We must begin to take advantage of what Allah has given us and utilize the resources that Allah puts at our avail. So he said this phrase before in another chapter, I believe chapter 2 or chapter 3. And actually, if you notice throughout these chapters, he does somewhat kind of repeat himself in certain ways. But of course, that's intentional. It's kind of like his way of really emphasizing these are the keys you really want to focus on. The importance of working in the community, the purpose of being actively involved and investing in your community. That if you don't do this, you're not going to be able to build an upright community. And on top of that, if you're not able to maintain your family, you should forget all about having a struggle or maintaining a community. It's just not gonna happen. You need to be successful on both ends if you truly want to have a successful struggle. And he also, of course, speaks about the importance of having balance. Because one thing I'll admit, so he talked about how there are Muslims that spend all their time in the masjid, and this is not the right approach. Now, in my opinion, just based on my observations, you don't really see that much of that happening here, right? I think it's more of the other way around. Mostly, I think what we see here in our communities are Muslims who get so caught up on the business side of things that they neglect the family aspect and the spiritual aspect, right? And that's when he starts talking about that. He talks about how the importance of putting aside to deal with your family, to be there for your family, to be there at the masjid. The importance of having that balance, right? And so I really appreciated him kind of mentioning that point because I felt like, okay, the other point, yes, that's important, but we don't really see that issue of monkship in our communities today. But we do see the issue of not really investing time into family and spirituality. And the last point I really want to highlight um, before he ends this chapter is where he talks about that as fathers, as mothers, as parents, as leaders of our household, we are essentially teachers. So he says the first responsibility of the Muslim is that he is a teacher. That is his job, to teach. His first school, his first classroom is within the household. His first student is himself. He deals with himself and then he begins to convey the knowledge he has acquired to the family, the people who are closest around him. And then, of course, from there, it builds and builds and builds. And I really, really love this analogy, right? That all of us, in our own ways, are indeed teachers, right? And I really appreciated him sharing that mentality, right? Because when we think of teachers, guys, what do we think? We think of someone who is a role model, someone who is responsible, someone whom we depend on to help us grow and become better than who we are, right? And whether we acknowledge it or not, all of us have that role to some extent in our community. Whether you are a father, whether you are a mother, whether you are a sibling, whether you are a friend, you have a teacher role to a certain extent. And I think through kind of shaping that mentality in yourself, kind of approaching your life with that mentality that, I'm a teacher to someone out there, it can really help you do what you need to do and really kind of help you further grow individually and make an effort to grow your families and your community. So I really did appreciate um, that particular paragraph of his. So that's all I have for you guys tonight. There's a few more points he makes in that chapter, but I want to give others an opportunity to share as well. So for those of you who are watching via live stream, we're going to be ending the session here. Please join us next week. We'll be going over chapters 9 and 10, and that will actually be the end of the book. So inshallah, next week will be very exciting. اللهم سبحانك وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خيرا والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله